You've decided you're ready to become a parent, and suddenly you're overwhelmed with people who feel they have the right to inform you on the correct way to conceive, give birth, what fears you should have, and the proper way to parent. How do you filter through the opinions? How do you know what's trustworthy information and what's a myth or just plain outdated? Welcome to the Birth Ease podcast. Join your host Michelle Smith and her guests as they cut through the noise and fear by sharing valuable tips, tools, and proven methods that help you connect with your own inner wisdom as you navigate the sacred journey that is pregnancy, birth, and parenthood in a more relaxed and confident manner. This podcast does not constitute, nor is it intended, as medical advice.
Hello, Birth Ease families. Welcome to your reprieve from the noise and the stress that can so often follow us in this journey of life. I'm your host, Michelle Smith. In this special episode, in honor of Pregnancy and Infant Loss Month, I am very honored and blessed to have with me the Radical Rabbi, Elisheva. She is going to be sharing with us her wisdom and her own journey through loss. Welcome and thank you for being here, Rabbi Elisheva.
Thank you, Michelle. I'm honored to be here.
So to begin, can you share a little bit about yourself as the Radical Rabbi and all of the good works that you're doing?
Oh, well, thanks. Your listeners probably don't know, but you know that I am a divorce and family lawyer. And in that life, I go by Emily Brenner, my secular name. And I am a nationally certified counseling psychologist. And I'm an energy psychologist, and I'm a rabbi. And I've put all of those together into the Radical Rabbi, which is most representative of my work in the world, which is helping people through their life passages by finding wisdom that works from all of those different disciplines.
And there's a lot of wisdom, I have to say. There's a lot of wisdom there. And so we're all really blessed to have you here with us.
Well, I feel blessed to be here, Michelle. You know how I feel about your amazing, amazing work.
Thank you. Thank you. I feel the same about yours, and that's why I'm so blessed to share it. I know that you too have lost a baby, and if you feel comfortable, can you please share a bit about that story with our listeners, please?
Sure. Whoa, it's always a difficult thing to talk about because we're never comfortable. I'm never completely comfortable to talk about this. It's a gaping wound in my soul. But I will tell you the story because maybe it will help other people. So I was pregnant with a little girl, my only daughter, actually. And this was 1987. And I developed some kind of virus, and I had a placenta previa. And the virus was some strange thing that was eating out the placental tissue, and it ruptured. And I wound up giving birth under very, very dramatic circumstances in a hospital in Tel Aviv, Israel. And I almost died. And the baby was alive, and she otherwise would have lived. I was almost 8 months. But she was compromised by whatever this virus was as well, I'm assuming. And at any rate, as I lay there in the hospital, I didn't know if she would live or die. She was in intensive care. And I lay there in that horrible space of not knowing. And I was angry at God. I was very angry, and I said, God, just let her live. Whatever, just let her live. There are people who are, having third trimester abortions who don't want their children. And here I want this child so badly. I just want her to have life. Even if she's blind, even if she's compromised, I want her to have life. And, that was the tsunami in my soul, of praying to God to bring life through me. And at that time, I am a religious Jew. And my husband contacted our rabbi in Atlanta, Georgia, where I live. And he is a Hasidic rabbi, and told him the situation. And he in turn called the Lubavitcher Rebbe, who, may he rest in peace, who was alive still at that time. And the Rebbe, as he was called, had gone out to meditate at the grave of his father-in-law. And when he came back, he called my rabbi and gave him a message. And it's a story, and I'd like to share it with you and with all the listeners out there who lose a child, because it was so profound to me. After this story, I was able to handle it, because my little girl did die a few days after that. And this is the story that kept me from just absolutely losing it. And it goes like this. A woman stood before the heavenly tribunal, awaiting her lot in the world to come. The tribunal convened, and they told her, "You have been righteous, so righteous in all that you've done in your life, that you're deserving of a special place at the throne of the Creator in paradise. Except for one problem, there's a flaw." And they proceed to roll back the curtain and show her the beginnings of her life. And it went back to the pogroms in Poland. And there her mother died in childbirth with her. And a soldier saw this little baby and took pity on her, or a pogromer, I don't know if it was a soldier, took pity on her and brought her to a convent to be raised. Now, at that time, there were many nuns and sisters who believed that these Jewish babies were creatures of God, but just not completely human. And so they raised them like barn animals. And this child did not know the love of a mother, the love of a father. She knew only the interaction that one has with an animal, where you respect life at its basest level. And so she lived until she was 2 years old, when she was adopted by a family. And interestingly, the Rebbe doesn't say if the family was Jewish or not Jewish, just by a family who raised her to be this very, very righteous woman that she had become. And the tribunal says to her, choose very, very carefully, because we're sending you back. We're sending you back to parents that will surely correct this flaw for you in your next life, so that you can achieve your entry into paradise. And, when I add to the story that since she was so righteous, she says to the tribunal, won't it hurt them terribly when I'm called back? And they say to her, you'll learn what you're supposed to learn, and they will learn what they're supposed to learn. And of course, the next chapter of the story opens with the parents that she chose and went to. They're saying to their rabbi, "Rabbi, what did we do that God would take our little girl from us at the age of 2? And that's what I, as the Radical Rabbi, call a divine reframe, a major divine reframe. When I heard the story, it really, really quieted the storm in my own heart, because I had a realization, and here's what it was. We had decided to name this child after my husband's grandmother, who, may she rest in peace, always dreamt of going to Palestine. At that time, it was before Israel. And she was herself a very righteous woman. And instead, she was killed in a pogrom and buried somewhere, in a mass grave in Poland. And I realized when I heard the Rebbe's story that this was the soul of his grandmother who had come through me, and that she knew that somehow, while it would hurt very badly, because I wanted to know her, that I would do what she needed me to do for her, and that was to ferry her to be buried in the Holy Land. And she did. In fact, she was born on Sabbath and died on the Sabbath. And as is the case in Israeli hospitals, had people praying for her 24 hours a day. And so she had a very, very, very short but extremely holy life in that sense. It was her passage to a completion for her. And so I offer that out to other parents out there who've lost a child or a loved one, to remember that they come in with their journey. Those souls are on a journey, and they've chosen you. They've chosen you to ferry them through part of the journey for whatever comfort that gives.
That's the most beautiful story. I'm all teary. Thank you for sharing it and being just so open with your journey. And for myself, this is my personal belief. I feel like we make agreements between parent and child before our children are born. And I feel like as parents, the most loving act possible is to say that I will walk through that hell, because to me it's a form of hell, of losing you, my beloved child, so that you can have the journey that your soul desires and needs.
I'm sitting here and really feeling it, Michelle. It's hard, even these 33 years later. It's heavy. The story has gravitas, and my heart goes out to all of your, I don't know what you call them, your flock,
My
your
listeners, yeah,
your
my
listeners,
families.
who are going through this, only to say that they're really blessed to have somebody who recognizes it as part of a journey on their side, at their side.
Yeah, we never forget. You never forget. If you lose a child, if you do that very, very loving act of giving your child up for adoption, which my brother is adopted, and that is one of the greatest gifts anyone could ever give us. But parents don't forget. We mothers don't forget that child is a part of us, and to expect parents to just get over it, it's not going to happen. It's never going to happen. It changes you forever.
Well, I think you bring up a really good point. You know, when you lose a child, especially a baby, a newborn, as I did, you know, people see you and you're still swollen from the pregnancy, and they say, "Oh, that's too bad. You'll have another one. You're still young. You're still healthy. You'll have another one." And there is no other one. There's something else, but there's not really a replacement.
Right. Right. I've heard it said, which child of yours would you want to give up? Because that's the equivalent. That's your child. And you can have another child, but it doesn't replace the child that you've lost and you loved.
So the reframe is that I didn't lose her.
Mm,
I helped her complete. She's still my child.
yes. Yes. Exactly. So as you walked through this journey of grief, and as the Radical Rabbi, I know you shared that beautiful story, but is there anything else that helped you to move through that grief?
Time, my prayer life. And I also have over the years developed a kind of program. We've talked about it. I call it God's 5 steps for overcoming absolutely anything. And that's something that I teach as the Radical Rabbi. And it's based on the journey of the Israelites in the desert. And if you come to my website, or if you come and want to study it more, it's available but it's basically what I consider the most foundational 5 steps for weathering just about anything. And they include being in the grief first. I mean, when we talk about grief, I'm going to apply it to the grief. The first stage would actually to be in it. The natural thing is to want it to go away, to want to disengage from it. And that's what we do with conflict. We want to disengage, but with grief, you want to sit with it and process it. And the second stage is to gather yourself. And that's a hard thing when you've been under stress or trouble thing, but it's just to find your spiritual center. And the third step is to look at what's really there. What's really there in the case of a child loss is you've had a child loss. And there's a lot of stuff that you might be telling yourself around that is not what's really there. You may be telling yourself, oh, I can never have another one. I'm a failure. My body doesn't work. My husband won't love me anymore. All my friends have kids. What's wrong with me? All of those voices that try to convert this into a personal failure to us. And it's very, very important to examine in this third stage what is really there and separate it from the story you're telling yourself. And at that point, of course, you would want to talk to your doctors and talk to your God, your source, to decide what you will do next. Because the third part of that stage is to see the salvation of God, which is to say, to understand that this is a holy thing that's happened. And there is something there for you that is ordained. However you frame that, whatever your relationship with your divine source, there's something more going on than just what you're telling yourself about it. There's finding that inner spiritual connection around it too. And that's a very important step. And then, of course, finding your peace and ultimately doing the next right thing. And all of those require a lot of work to really go through. And that program, though it's 5 steps, it'll take as long as it takes. But that's what you're supposed to go through at this time. It's what you're supposed to. When you say to yourself, I don't know how I'll ever deal with this, that's a sign that those are the steps that you need. And of course, Radical Rabbi, I have variations on programs. It's a little different for major grief and different if you have a high conflict ex that you're dealing with, which can also compound the situation if you've had that loss and you're dealing with a high conflict ex. You're both engaging and disengaging at the same time. It can be a little bit, you're engaging with your grief and disengaging from the person who's making your life a misery. And that's going to make it even more difficult to go through. But those are the basic steps, the basic rhythms of overcoming anything. And, I invite you to visit. I don't know what would be the best thing to do for your community, Michelle. What do you think?
I think even just sharing of that wisdom, you brought up so many good points. And I know even in my own loss, when I had a miscarriage, as painful and difficult as that was, it taught me. And in some ways, it really was a gift. Even my traumatic first birth with my eldest, it taught me and it served me. But in the beginning of our grief, we're not always ready to find that. So I think it's wonderful that you have this program that my families can reach out to you.
Well, with your permission, I am happy to do this for your community to the extent that it would be helpful again and that you would recommend it. If somebody wants to schedule like a half hour with me to talk about it and try to find their meaning in it, I'm happy to do that. They need to go to my website and they can schedule that with me. Just let me know that they're coming from the Birthies community.
And thank you, because as someone that is walking through a journey of grief right now. I have to say that before we started this interview, I cried on my beautiful Rabbi Elisheva's shoulder, and it was profound and very healing. So, if anyone is also walking through this journey of grief, I really highly recommend it. It's a blessing.
Thank you, Michelle.
You're welcome. Thank you. So, since you mentioned how grief can impact couples, and in your work as a divorce attorney, I've heard it said that often the loss of a child can lead to a separation or a divorce. Do you have any wisdom that you can share around that?
Well, whenever there's a huge stressor, and obviously the loss of a child is a huge stressor, both people in the relationship start telling each other whatever stories are going through their head. Here we are at stage 3, and each of them is like, oh, it's my fault, or it's your fault because you stressed me out too much, or it's my fault because I didn't give her the support she needs. And it can really tear a relationship apart. This is an invitation to intimacy and vulnerability and mutual support and mutual grieving to help each other through. And yet, it's a natural thing to feel anger and separation. And sometimes for a woman or a man, like I don't know if you find this too, Michelle, but there's a resistance to intimacy because the thought of even trying to have another child and going through this grief again is just something that if it happened again, you would die. And so it can cause a tremendous amount of relationship stress. So what I would say is this: be patient with each other, give each other room to grieve in the way that you grieve, be open with each other, remind yourself not to close off. It's an invitation to intimacy, to making the love and the closeness and intimacy of your relationship greater. And if there's an impediment to that, again, if you're having trouble with that, then I would suggest reaching out to get help. Again, I mean, you can talk to me, you can talk to Michelle, but it's not something that you should allow to fester. I mean, I know it does definitely cause divorce. And by the way, I'll say this for your families that do have children, it can also be any kind of major changes and shifts within a relationship stress the relationship. But this is certainly one where there's so much negative self-talk that happens with the grief, and you're so vulnerable. So vulnerable. Your heart is open, and there's grief, and there's anger, and there's dread, and there's
Self-blame.
for many people even shame, and self-blame. Do you find that too?
Yeah, a lot of self-blame, a lot of shame.
Yeah, and that's something that you really owe it to yourself, to your spouse, to your other children, and to your future children to process carefully, learn from it, let it be a wisdom teacher to you, because it's very difficult, if not impossible, when you're in the moment to see it this way. But there is something good that's come of it. And that exploration is what will heal you.
Yeah, and in the moment, it just doesn't seem possible. But with
Right.
time and grace, so many of us find that.
When the Rebbe sent me that story, I can't even begin to tell you what that story did for me. I hope that sharing it will help some of your listeners too, who are going through grief and even just bringing their children into the world, to listen to the wisdom of this great, great mystical Rebbe. Because my soul it was like my heart almost couldn't stay within my chest. I was raging against God and raging against myself in the most helpless rage, the rage of not being able to do anything about it. Come on, she's breathing. Can't we keep that going? I mean, this is modern science, for crying out loud. What is this? And the minute I heard that story and I had that reframe for myself, what I call the divine reframe, it just changed everything. My soul achieved peace. Does that mean that it achieved an end to pain? No. But it achieved the ability for me to wrap my mind around the pain. I had a story that my soul could accept and my mind could accept that just changed my perspective on my role as a mother to this child. And that's my invitation to your listeners, is to use that story. It's a very sacred story to me, and sharing it is really a gift from my deepest soul to parents everywhere. If you've been there, you know it.
Right. Right. And it's such a beautiful story. And I think too, it invites that possibility that even in our deepest sorrow, in our deepest pain, we can still find peace. We can still find moments of joy when we're ready to embrace those. And for me, just knowing that my loved one would want me to find joy again and find the light in that darkness instead of allowing it to consume me, because it can.
You know what I say, you and I've talked about this before, Michelle, that when a child is born, so is motherhood. So is that inner mother that is born, that part of your personality that is the mother for this child. And the mother is there and the child is not. The mother that wants to nurse and hold and feel the skin against skin of your new baby and look with wonder, and say to this little person, "Hi, who are you? What are we going to do together?" And that's gone. And so mother is there, empty and aching.
Right.
And we need to recognize her and allow her time to accept that. It's such a profoundly difficult thing.
It is. It is. I agree. And I believe we begin that journey of motherhood the moment that we conceive. And for some of us, our journey with that child is very brief. And other times we have a long, happy journey with our child. Sometimes our journey is more difficult. But that journey of motherhood begins with conception.
And maybe for some people, even before.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I think my journey to motherhood began about 20 generations ago.
Tell me more.
Well, I think that there's an ancient pathway of motherhood, of the memories from when you're a little child that tell you that someday you're going to be a mommy. When your mom or your grandmother does something with you that makes you know, like in the case of me, the Radical Rabbi, I remember when I was a very, very tiny little girl that my grandma would pick me up to light the Sabbath candles. She would hold my hand with the little match so I wouldn't burn myself, and I would light my own candle. Well, what that meant to me was that someday I would be a mommy and I would hold my baby to light the candle. And I see little girls playing with their dolls, and they are mimicking the way that their mommies care for them. And their mommies learned that from the way they were cared for and from the traditions that were passed on. And so, the expectation of carrying on certain traditions, of carrying on motherhood, of carrying on, that's implanted in us long before we're ever even conceived by our own parents, who were thinking about the day that they would be parents. I mean, my mother probably played with dolls and knew what mommy she was going to be long before, and her mother too. So we all kind of have that internal image of mother. Well, sometimes people don't, and it's really hard. They worry, like, oh my God, am I going to be able to be a good mom? What if I don't love my baby? But that's it's not. I mean, how usual is that, Michelle?
I think a lot of parents worry about being the best parent that they can be, and those are usually the ones that are going to be the better parents. It's the parents that don't have some of those worries that you get kind of concerned about, if that makes sense.
I suppose. I think we all wonder, like, what if we're not going to be a good mom? And then that baby comes and it's in your arms, and oh my God.
Yeah.
I always say that I don't know about your clients, Michelle, but the way I always got pregnant again was by smelling a new baby's head.
Yes.
I didn't need a man. I just needed to smell a new baby's head. That was it. I mean, like if there was a random sperm floating in the air, any place, it would get me in that moment. And
Yes.
honestly, and I consider myself very, very blessed for that. Very blessed for that.
Yeah.
Because after the child that I lost, I will say that I had 3 sons, and I had a son before the little girl that I lost. And I feel very, very, very blessed as a mother to them. And I hope that everybody in the world that has children feels about their children the way I do about mine. It's actually almost sickening how much I could brag about them. I always say that I love sitting with somebody else where I can freely brag about my children and where they can freely brag about theirs. And we know that it won't make the other one feel bad because our kids are just as nice. But that's not always the case. Sometimes parenthood can be very painful, and we have to be sensitive to that. When we
Right.
can't assume that everybody's having the same expectation or the same joy or the same grief or the same experience of parenthood.
Yes.
So all of those things impact the relationship. I know that's a very long answer, but when you say that could lead to divorce, oh my gosh, yes.
Yeah. Yeah, and I found too, working with grieving families, what's comforting for one family is not comforting for another. And I love too how you touched on when people say, "Oh, you can have another baby." That's not always the case. And it's important to be mindful when sharing that kind of what feels comforting, but it can actually be wounding. Maybe this family's gone through years of infertility and is finally pregnant and lose that child. Maybe they've incurred multiple losses. It's important to be sensitive to that. And again, to circle back, just to honor that they are parents. They are parents. The journey with their child was just a shorter journey.
Right. And I think that's really important. There's no one size fits all thing for this. We're all very complicated. And for some women, the ability to have children is kind of a virility thing. They feel somehow like a failure if they can't have children. And for other women who get pregnant very easily, if they're in a situation where it's not a good marriage or where there's a lot of economic problem with it, or there's not where your beliefs around it make it, oh my God, I can't believe I'm pregnant again. How did this happen? All of those things can really impact, as you put it so well, the agreements with the child. But that's a little bit off our topic, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And
But
I could just
we
talk about this forever.
yeah, we go on wonderful tangents. But I'm wondering if you can, real quickly, if you have any advice for parents comforting their other children when they've incurred a loss. How do we support the siblings?
I think a lot of that has to do with your belief system. I personally believe that it is important to grieve in the open when you're grieving. The part of me that's a therapist knows that one of the worst I would say probably the most ubiquitous cause of mental issues is a lack of straightforwardness in our homes with allowing our children to see what they see or feel what they feel. I think it's really important to let them voice their feelings, let them voice their bewilderment, and to not sugarcoat it. If you have a good story that you can use, the story that I had, of course, I used with my son, but I also cried. I mean, I didn't try to hide the grieving or even the anger that I felt about it or the bewilderment. And it's just something. I mean, one of the things that you raise a huge question, Michelle, but how do we teach our children to live with unknowing and also feel safe? And for me,
Yes.
the answer, of course, is in what I call radical faith, that part of us that is always tethered to the divine source that says, I'm on this journey, but I don't necessarily know everything that's going to happen or why everything happens. And I believe that ultimately it's for the good, even if it hurts. And so, of course, that's what I would impart to my children. But what I would say across the board is be honest. Be honest and authentic in your feelings and deliver the message that when life deals us something very hard, we process it and we go through it and we incorporate whatever we can from it. That will help your children be psychologically healthy.
Yeah, thank you for that, because it's so important. I think children get overlooked.
And there's a part of them that's going to feel like it's their fault too.
Yeah. Yeah. I shouldn't have said real quickly because it's not a real quick answer. I just know that our time is winding down together, because this is a topic that we could, I think, explore for hours and hours.
And lifetimes and lifetimes.
Yes. Yes. So if there's one pearl of wisdom that you would like to share with my birthies families from the Radical Rabbi, what would that be?
I would say have faith. Look inside yourself to find that place where you connect with your source, and sit with that in the belief that you are living in this world for a reason, and your journey as a parent has a reason. And don't be afraid to explore that and make it into a blessing and to experience your experiences fully in that.
That's beautiful. Thank you. So, if any of the families would like to reach out to you to learn more, to schedule that appointment, how can they reach you, please?
Well, there's my website, www.theradicalrabbi.com. Reach me on the website, and there will be a link there to my calendar. I have a calendar that they can schedule on. And I want to, reiterate that I'm there for all of you out there who are going through this very, very dramatic life transition. And I would love to help you develop your own divine reframe, as I call it, so that you can really understand the story that you're living.
Thank you so much. I'm so grateful for your wisdom and for you. Thank you for spending this time with us.
Well, you're so welcome, Michelle. Thanks for having me on. This is a very, very important topic to me. So, a little bit, I feel selfish in how happy I am to be here.
Yeah, it's important. It's important work. So
It is.
thank you. Thank you for who you are and what you do. And for those of you listening, please know that you're not alone in your grief. And there is support and resources out there for you. Be patient with yourself and kind to yourself, because this is one of those, as Rabbi Elisheva says, one of those hard stops in life. So thank you for being with us. and our many blessings to you. Which, can you say a blessing, please? Would you mind to end our episode?
Well, here's my blessing for the whole Birthies community. May it be that you come to understand yourselves as holy vessels, as vessels who are charged with bringing down life and allowing life to flow through you, whether it's through your own body or through the love that has been sent for a child that's come through someone else's body. Because you, as parents, you create the future. You guide and nurture the future. May it be that you do that with wisdom, with radical faith in your hearts and souls, and with the love of all that are around you, and know that you're loved by an endless love. May it be so.
Thank you so much.
For more great conversations like these, or to find out more information and access Michelle's library of amazing guests, go to birthiesservices.com/podcasts. For more information on the Birthies method, Michelle's classes, meditations, and other services, go to birthiesservices.com.